Okay, and welcome back. And this is, I was just thinking about this, and Greg, maybe you can chime in a little bit. But I know here we are all so humbled that all of you, our current panel, and all of our presenters yesterday, and Amanda, and everybody else agreed to come, agreed to participate with everything going on in the world today. And I think that just, for me, I was just reflecting on that. It highlights how important relationships are, how important it is to support each other within this crisis and emergency management and communications community, how important it is for us to just to come together and share and learn and grow and not just keep on our own bubbles. And so, I was just feeling, wow, this is so great that all these people are coming to support us, but that's so important, and that's one of the key foundations and pillars of emergency and crisis management. So I'm just so grateful that you guys are all here. I'm going to introduce you, Greg. Greg is going to run our panel of emergency management pros and an inspiring PIO, a dear friend of mine. I got to read your thing, Greg, but Greg and I go way back. I used to be a paramedic in the city of Calgary. Greg was a firefighter in the city of Calgary. And it just seems like as our careers and our lives have changed, we keep crossing paths and keep supporting each other. So Greg Solecki has over 20 years of senior leadership experience in emergency continuity, crisis, and risk management. The focus of his expertise is to ensure that leaders and executives are prepared for major business interruptions such as loss of workforce, like a pandemic, loss of workplace, like an earthquake, or loss of service, like a cyber attack, through site alignment and corporate crisis leadership. He's created numerous preparedness, continuity, and security programs to ensure progressive and sustained operations, additionally serving as site and EOC manager during countless emergencies and disasters in Canada. He provides his expertise for international standards development related to crisis, emergency, and continuity management. That's where my sheet ends, Greg, but there's so much more. You're past president of the International Association of Emergency Managers. You're published in white papers. You are one of the smartest, progressive emergency management business continuity guys that cares, and you continue to drive the profession forward. And it's such an honor that you're joining us from Kelowna. I think you're in Kelowna today.
Yeah, it's true. Making my way out to the West Coast right now, but yeah, just to I think reiterate what Amanda had said, as well as what you're getting to. Yeah, this isn't over, and when it started, as far as this pandemic's concerned, right, and COVID, had a lot of thoughts and feelings, and a lot of us didn't have a lot of time, I think, to reach out and get to the people that we wanted to speak to. So I'm amazed as well, and really excited to be able to hear from some of these folks. Most of them I've worked with in some type of routine within the whole cycle of emergency management, the mitigation, preparedness, response, recovery, and knowing they've always had their plans in place and been prepared from a pandemic perspective. Yeah, I was wondering what was going on in their worlds at that time and this time. So we'll be able to figure it out here a little bit and hear from them, because they're still in it and there's so much they've learned. And this will be the first time even I get to speak to them for the most part and find out what they've gone through and what we can all hear and learn from them.
Well, I'll let you introduce the panel and run it from there, Greg. And I'm just going to sit back and soak this one up.
All right. This is great. I'll go through a summary of some of their bios as well, so that we can get to the questions that we have and the questions that I know already a lot of our observers have. So to start off, Mr. Darren Butt is an international crisis and emergency management specialist. Darren is called upon by organizations around the globe to develop and enhance their emergency and corporate crisis systems to bring them to world-class levels. He has also built, contributed to, and instructed several academic emergency management programs around the world, and is currently leading the development of the new Incident Command and Management System training program for the Middle East. I don't see if you if our panel has actually put their cameras on yet, but if you have, feel free to give a wave there. Darren, all right, there you are. Haven't seen you for a while. Good to see you.
Hey, brother, how are you? How are you?
Good, thanks. Good, thanks. I'll move on to Mr. Shane Schreiber now. Shane's the Managing Director of the Alberta Emergency Management Agency. He spent the bulk of his career in command appointments in field units, including tours completed in Cyprus, Bosnia, and 2 tours in Afghanistan, for which he received the Canadian and NATO Meritorious Service and the U.S. Army Bronze Star medals. He also led units in a disaster response in Manitoba, so the floods in '97 and 2011, and in complex security operations Vancouver 2010 Winter Olympics. After retiring from the Canadian Army in 2012, Shane joined the Government of Alberta, working at the Alberta Emergency Management Agency and then the Flood Recovery Task Force. He was appointed to lead the province's efforts in response to the devastating floods in High River in June and July 2013, and currently Managing Director of AEMA, where he led Alberta's response to the Wood Buffalo wildfires in 2016. It's known as the largest and most complex fire event of its kind in Canadian history. Ms. Shawna Bruce, oh, Shane, you there? Good to see you. If you are, go ahead and give us a wave or a hello, thumbs up, whatever it may be. Good to have you. I can see you're on here somewhere. Ms. Shawna Bruce, Emergency Management Engagement Professional. Shawna's 25 plus years public affairs experience working with media at the local, national, and international levels gives her tried and true media relations skills. This offers clients a realistic approach on how to use media as a conduit in providing public information in a timely and accurate manner for various incidents. In addition to sharing her passion for crisis communications with clients, Shawna is currently a part-time instructor for NATE's Disaster and Emergency Management Program. Shawna remains active in community involvement through serving as the public member for the Northeast Region Community Awareness and Emergency Response, where she is an advocate for public safety and emergency communications. Shawna, good to have you with us as well. Last but not least, for sure, Mr. Josh Bowen, the manager for the Center for Applied Disaster and Emergency Management. Josh has been at the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology, known as NATE, since 2017, where he is currently serving as the director of the Relaunch Coordination Team. He was the founding manager of the Center for Applied Disaster and Emergency Management and is an instructor in the Disaster and Emergency Management Diploma Program. Prior to joining NATE, Josh served 13 years in the Canadian Armed Forces, and in addition to teaching at NATE, Josh has guest lectured at the University of Alberta, MacEwan University, and at York University. He is also a national commentator and presenter on issues related to disaster and emergency management, training, and preparedness. Morning, Josh. How's it going? All right. Got a wave out of you. Good to see you. So, great to have you here, everyone. And this panel, for the most part, as I mentioned, as we came into this, we're really looking at some of the known knowns, and actually knowing all of you folks. As I mentioned earlier, I know you've had a lot of experience, a lot of preparedness in place from every gamut on the disaster front, and also having those methodologies, processes, communications forms, those lines of communications. You've all got that experience there. But what went right and what didn't go so right? Meaning you've had those plans, you've lived through a lot of that now, even in the past with H1N1, H5N1. What did we learn from that as a nation? Some of those things I applied, but I'm really interested in hearing what you had as well. So I'll start with you, Darren, and I'll move across to maybe Shawna, Shane, and then Josh. But the first thing I want to ask you is what did you have in your plan, your pandemic plan, that was right on the mark? And conversely, which portion of that plan was way off? And what can our listeners and observers learn from that? Go ahead.
Well, thanks a lot, Greg. And first of all, hello to everybody. Salam alaikum from beautiful Doha. It is a privilege to be here, and thanks to the Center for Crisis Communication for inviting me. Privilege to also enjoy my colleagues. I think the first thing I want to put out there is when we started looking at COVID, we started looking at an unknown threat. And it presented itself, of course, as everybody knows, within China, within November, what we think is November, very early December. And one of the things that really struck us was the amount of the sheer speed of the infection, and how that infection actually started not just moving past Wuhan, but also started moving into other places within the globe. One of the things that we, and again, this comes from my experience that I had with H1N1. I was the resiliency coordinator for Public Safety Canada when we started looking, when H1N1 started hitting us in Canada. And we started developing a whole bunch of new models on how to deal with the virus spread. Now, as everybody knows, H1N1 vaccine was found very quickly, and all of this stuff was put in a big box and stuck into a government warehouse in Ottawa somewhere. However, coming over here, it was Canadian innovation. We unpacked that box and we brought it to the Middle East, and we started going and looking at what we need to do first. Greg, you asked a question about pandemic planning. Pandemic planning, I think, for every single person who's ever involved in disaster and emergency management, pandemic planning has always been either a side of the desk kind of a event. It's never been really taken quite seriously. H1N1 was certainly not the kicker that will cause people to kind of wake up and say, we have to deal with this threat. So we had to reinvent what our approach had to be. And what really kicked us into high gear here in the Middle East was understanding the benefits of what's called proactive intelligence. So we had developed, my team and I had developed some serious connections with not only the World Health Organization and also through the United Nations, who has a very profound presence here in the Middle East. But also we had some really good connections and relations with people in China, with officials in China. So we started seeing epidemiological studies, casualty rates, fatality rates very quickly. And we started understanding, we had to understand more about what this unknown threat would actually look like here in the Middle East. And I guess, throughout the world, because I know everyone is, this is undoubtedly a global perspective. What was off? I think everything was off. I don't think I'm unique in saying that, we were the ones that anybody actually got it right. We were, and I think Josh and Shawna and Shane and yourself, Greg, one of the things that really make a good practitioner in disaster and emergency management is their ability to pivot and pivot again. And we don't like that approach, we pivot again. And we don't like that approach, we pivot again. And we keep doing that until we get it right. And it was very much a learning process. We are still learning from it. I think it's we're going to be talking about this for decades to come.
Great, thanks. And if anybody missed it at the start of that, Darren's in Qatar right now, so I'm not sure exactly of your time zone and how late it is for you, but that's where a lot of the perspective is coming now. And Darren, before heading off to the Middle East, was spending a lot of time in Canada, as he mentioned. So Shawna, I'll move over to you, just kind of leading on from that. And Darren had mentioned, getting as much information as he could from the WHO. I'm really interested as well, your perspective from the communications, obviously, that information flow and some of the things you recognized and had on your plate.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think Tom Sampson out of Calgary and SEMA, I'm kind of coining a bit of his quote here because I've been using it often with my own take on it. But he said really early on in this that, we're dealing with a health pandemic, a mental health crisis, and an economic disaster, or words to that effect. And I think a lot of my clients and a lot of folks, I still work pretty closely with industry in the industrial heartland here. A lot of folks had plans, much like my colleague Darren said, well, they had a plan, but it's a plan people look at once a year, go, yeah, we got that. We got some extra water somewhere. It's all good to go. But no one really had lived through the plan, and no one had exercised it for weeks, let alone months, right? So I'd say the strong point was we had a plan, but it was a really rudimentary plan that didn't really help us get where we needed to go because we were dealing with three prongs of this crisis. No one was acknowledging the mental health impacts on employees and the pivot and now the work from home. No one was expecting the economic downturn that happened so quickly with some organizations. So I think that's where the pinch point was. And then I would say the next big observation I took away was people didn't have a plan to sustain it, to sustain their teams. And this was critically important for communications who, I'm like that broken record. I'm going to say communicators were the glue throughout all of this. I mean, the risk communications part at the beginning, the pivoting to get you working from home and understanding what you need to be doing from a precautionary perspective and getting us into the relaunch. I mean, it's all communicators that are helping support that. But some of these teams are like two people or one person or a team of six, and they're trying to sustain it for this prolonged period. So I think if I were being honest, if I had to create a scenario that put communications at the forefront and why it's important to train your communications team, this would be it.
Wow. Yeah, that's great. So many things there I want to reflect on as well as I lead into Shane here. But yeah, the other thing besides the communications one is finally a business continuity, right, that everybody had to think about. And as you say, from working from home and the communications aspect of that, like, oh, okay, that's where business continuity sort of leads in from the emergency management perspective. Shawna, you also mentioned the different crises we were dealing with. And I know, Shane, I tried to reach out at one time, or I did reach out at one time at the very beginning of this, because I had such an interest and perspective on the critical infrastructure impacts. And yes, this being, an impact to the health sector and all the other different sectors that would be feeling that impact and the interdependencies between them. But I wonder, still going back to the provincial plan or other plans that you may have had in place, what did work well, if possible, if that was possible, and what things did you learn as far as the other pandemics you had been through, and kind of the worked well, what didn't, but also the portion of the critical infrastructure interdependencies and how that looked to you. You might be on mute there, Shane, maybe. Okay. Can't hear you.
Shane, where are you, buddy?
All right. Okay, Josh, I mean, I think we're gonna have to move over to you.
Don't worry, Shane, I'll take over. We got this.
Story of your life,
Hey,
Josh? Seriously.
Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
So I think, with I'm in a post-secondary, and it was really, it was, in retrospect, it was hilarious. We hosted about 2.5 weeks before the whole world ended. We hosted a conference and brought together about 500 people from across the province. And Rich Serino was up talking from Harvard and formerly, deputy FEMA administrator. And he was saying, we got to be concerned about this coronavirus. It's fairly significant. And one of the things that we got from feedback from quite a number of people was there was too much emphasis placed on this coronavirus thing, and it's not actually a big deal. 2 weeks later, the world ended and everything got shut down. So, I think in so many different ways, nobody was prepared for what a pandemic means. And I think, to Amanda Coleman's point earlier today, that, crisis comms and business continuity plans are just, we're a tick in the box, right? And the number of business continuity plans that I was looking at, where they say, our recovery time objective is 4 hours. And if your critical functions are 4 hours, that means that nobody, like you're working 24/7. Nobody goes home on the weekend. Like, if you can sustain something, your functions, and go on a long weekend, or somebody can take vacation, then you don't have a 4-hour recovery time objective. It's at least 72, if not 96. So really understanding those timeframes and understanding that a pandemic is much more. The first questions that I was getting asked is like, so it's March 16th, we'll be back by April, right? And it was, there was a lot of people that are just saying, no, but probably May or June, everything will be fine again. And here we are, right? It's October. So really, understanding the long duration of this, and to the points that have been raised earlier by Darren and Shawna, like supporting our teams, and making sure that you got the ability to have people cycle in and people go on vacation during a crisis like this is absolutely huge. So I think those were some of the things that were missed. I do think some of the things that we hit the mark on right away was, day one, we had our crisis comms team brought together and said, right, let's do a couple of things. First, we're going to need to level set expectations up, down, and across. And so our staff knew what was going on. Our students knew what was going on. We were putting out, I think, far more messages than we normally do in a week. And we were putting those out about every hour and a half. It was just an incredible work from the comms team. And then we also made sure that, all of the senior leaders were on the same page, bringing them together really quickly. So we had a daily cord with the 23 different business units, the senior leadership there, and a daily brief to our executive. And every second day we were briefing the board on what was going on. So there was a whole lot of communication internally going on, but also then externally to the community. And that really helped to level set expectations and get everybody on the same page. And the other really big win that we had was that we developed our emotional communications before they were needed. So day one, the first thing that I said to our director of marketing communications was, we need to have a message ready for when we have a fatality in our community. We need to have a message ready for when we have multiple people affected. And we need to have those messages ready with, fill in the blank. Here's a holding statement, but here's also the emotional part of that message so that it's not developed when you're emotional. And I think that has really set us up for success. We have not had to use them yet, thankfully, knock on wood. But we still have them. We're ready, and they're getting tweaked, constantly as we go and being revised.
That's great. Yeah, I remember, and maybe we'll stay on communications a bit here, and I'll get to you, Sean, in a sec. But I remember that as well. I happened to be at that conference at NATE, and for me, it was the one slide that Rich put up there with the mortality rate and infectiousness, where it just kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. And I was able to speak to him more about that after and just ask a bunch of questions. But that was the one, right? And I know we all kind of see and learn differently, but the visuals are also important. So just moving on with that, Shawna, if you don't mind, and some of the information flow and the communication styles, like what did you notice, even globally or locally, some of the differences or some of the alignment with the messaging that was being shared out there, and what did you find that was effective or, again, not effective?
I'm not sure we have enough time for that question today, Greg. But I think some of the things that we saw, if I were saying on a positive sense, we saw more people trying to go where their audiences were going to get information. So we saw more people leaning in on the social media front, which was great. I mean, we certainly saw misinformation and disinformation as part of that too. But I think for the most part, we saw that key leaders recognize the need to go where the public's getting info, become that trusted and credible source for information for the public in that. But I think what still bothers me, and we're not there yet, we didn't have always clear, consistent and sort of coordinated, I would say, communication, right? And we didn't bring the risk research to the table with risk communications people to help develop it. We were relying on people that worked in organizations that maybe didn't have any background in this space. So how are you framing messages, and how are you reaching the demographics individually? We talk about at-risk audiences, and the reality is you probably, if you looked really close, like Amanda talks about, and look at your audiences, we think about at-risk as being the add-ons, but the reality is they're more the general public. Do you know what I mean? So you need special communications, for the students, for the youth, for the aging, you know, for those that, for the homeless. Like, you need to know who's in your audience, and you need to be creating these networks of outreach in advance so that you can tap into them during the crisis. And I still think we're muddling because we got a lot of mixed messaging, and people went to, like, you know, cutesy little videos and things. And in some cases they were good, but in the very beginning of this crisis, all we saw was that germ image, right? The germ. And I kept seeing that, like, wash your hands and wear a mask. And there was this germ. And really, in risk comms, if you want people to take a behavioral action, you need to reflect the image to the action you wish them to take. So if you want them to wash their hands, then use a photo of someone washing their hands. Do you know what I mean? We learn that way. So I think with me, we could have had a lot of improvement in that coordinated effort. And I'm really hoping we get it together before the vaccine becomes available. Does that answer sort of what you were thinking?
That's great.
About?
Yeah, excellent. And so Darren, along those lines, and some of the things we've heard about the communication styles and what we've.
That's right. That's right.
What we've heard, it's so Darren, what were some of the early like pandemic warning signs from a, you know, communication perspective that you saw prior to your organization where you're at now, moving to an emergency readiness position? What did that look like, and how did you transition into that way?
I think it's, you know, I was just listening to Shawna, and Shawna, as you're speaking, I don't know if you could see me, but I'm agreeing with everything that you're saying, because it was as you were talking, I was going through every single time period by which I actually was exposed to that level of, I guess, decision making that had to be. We had to say, you know, we had to figure out what to say and how to say it. And I will always remember this one story. I remember the very first time that we had found, or it was discovered, that we had a COVID-19 employee. I mean, I work as the director of crisis management for one of the largest LNG companies in the world, and it is all about the culture of my employer is very much about transparency. It's very much about truth. It is very much about it's gravitated towards understanding good business. And I remember the reaction. It was almost vitriolic in terms of not being able to release the fact that we had one infection. And I remember looking at our chief executive officer, and I said, "Sir, if we don't release this, it will get out." And he looked at me and he said, "But it's not our way. It is not in our culture, not in the Arabic culture, in order to talk like this." I said, "Sir, you're going to have one right now. You're going to have 1,000 in the next week and a half, if our numbers are right." And what did he do? He said, "Yeah, let's release it." And since that time, every single person who's been involved in the communication side of, especially here in the Middle East, my employer has been seen as being almost a champion in terms of that level of communication transparency, getting that information out. Has it always been good? No. I still remember the day that we had to announce our first fatality, and of course, you know, that's always tough. But it continues to be a challenge, and I think. Building on something that Shawna just said, I think we've created a new dawn, a new way of understanding, and a new expectation, I think, from emergency management practitioners to really clear the air when it comes to how we actually address these types of incidents, not only from a functional operational perspective, but also communicate it to the greater public much more readily and much more accuracy.
Great, thanks, Darren. And you mentioned, and you and Josh both mentioned it here already, like being prepared or having to have the communication ready when you have that death in your community, and what that would be like. So looking at that a bit more broadly, and I'll go to Shane now here. So that whole emergency management or the health community, how do we plan to review, or have we started looking at reviewing already what this next year looks like, for example, as we get through this main tough period, and then potentially have a vaccine. So what does that look like right now, Shane?
Yeah, can you guys hear me? Can you hear me now?
There he is. Hey, buddy.
Okay, it's not getting me to talk. It's shutting me up. That's the hard part. So I think there's three things. The first thing is if you did not communicate well from the get-go, many organizations did. Some organizations didn't, but if you didn't communicate well from the get-go, you've probably have to work twice as hard now to reestablish public trust, which is critically important, because they won't believe the message if they don't believe the messenger. And I think that's, you're seeing that in a lot of different jurisdictions where an initial stumble has meant that whatever organization has got to work extra hard now as we get into the dog days of the pandemic, where the public doesn't trust your message or the audience doesn't trust your message. I would argue that in Alberta, we were very fortunate in that we had a great spokesperson in Dr. Dina Hinshaw, and she is a trusted communicator. And so, but even with somebody, the quality of Dina Hinshaw, the message becomes, the message begins to wear on everybody. So the second point is to really, as the message begins to wear, the official message begins to wear, you have to chase down the rumors and the disinformation ruthlessly. And so you have to be ready to dispel the rumors, to provide simple, clear, truthful messages, and that has to keep going. If you fail to do that, again, if you lose the trust of the audience, then you've got a really big problem, especially because it's not just a public health challenge. It is a social and economic challenge. And I think Shawna already spoke to that. It's really, it's about much more than public health. It's about people's jobs. It's about their livelihoods. It's about their children going to school. And it's difficult to communicate across all that vast, all those issues effectively unless you keep your messages simple, focused, and repeat them time and again, and make sure that you're dispelling the rumors and addressing the disinformation. And then thirdly, I'd say it has to have a human touch. And it's the one thing I think, I would argue that Dina Hinshaw has done fairly well. It's another thing that if you take a look at somebody like Doug Ford, Premier Doug Ford has done very well. They've put a real human touch on it. And I think, you can take a look at other jurisdictions where they treat it solely as a public health issue, and it comes across as just a medical problem. And I think that's when you begin to really, you have to keep the human in the message. And I think that's going to be critically important as we move forward, because you're going to lose. So, you're going to lose your audience if you lose the fact that they're humans and are reacting in a very human way to the crisis. And your previous panels and speakers have talked all about how important that is.
Thanks a lot, Shane. And one thing, I'll move on to Josh next. The same sort of thing, Josh, how you're looking back right now to prepare for the next few waves. But I really do want to mention, Shane, that it was so satisfying, gratifying, and I don't know if you want to speak to it, but in any case, to see how prepared Alberta was and some of the municipalities, so much so that you were basically lending equipment, resources to the other provinces in the East that were struggling so much at a time. And I think, and in my opinion anyway, just going through H1N1, H5N1, and some of the things we learned, just the communication flow and the way that in Canada, the way our health system works, because of the way it's structured, it seemed that it made it a little bit easier to share the information and to be able to share some of those resources. But it was just great to see that. And I mention that all the time, that, Alberta was that prepared that we were able to provide that for the rest of the country. So Josh, yeah, looking back, what have you done, or have you started doing any type of review? I know your new position is almost states that. So how are you developing that, and how are you working on that right now?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we've got is we've got a team that's constantly doing a review of what we're doing, and so we have a team that's looking and saying, what are other post-secondaries doing? We're engaged with every post-secondary in Alberta. We're also looking across the country and down south and internationally as well, and saying, you know, what are the things that you're coming up with? What are the best practices? There's a fantastic network of post-secondary emergency managers. One of the biggest things that we've taken away is immediately integrating communications professionals and then catching them up on crisis comms and emergency management and that kind of thing, because I think it's far easier for comms professionals to jump in and figure out the crisis side of things and figure out the emergency management side of things than it is for people like me to try to communicate effectively to multiple different audiences in multiple different ways and multiple different modalities and be able to do that effectively. So having and I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted here, but having great comms people is the single biggest asset that you can have. Because if you can have the absolute best plan in the world and execute it, but if nobody knows that you're doing it and nobody knows why you're doing it, then there's no point. It's not going to be effective. And so I think a couple of things that we've done specifically is say we are going to start the semester the same way we're going to end it, we're going to end the semester the same way we're going to start it. And the idea really gives that level setting expectation. So our students know what to expect, our staff know what to expect, our community knows what to expect, and we can say, yeah, there's going to be some bumps and there's going to be some ups and downs, and we may have to delay some programs if we have an outbreak or something like that. But we're actually in a position now where we've and all the post-secondaries in Alberta have gone out and said, and this is what we're doing for winter semester, so that staff and students can start planning for that reality, and providing people with some sort of, this is the baseline, this is what you can expect going forward, has been hugely important. And we've got a lot of really good feedback in all post-secondaries on that specifically.
Great.
The other thing is we just did an in-action review as opposed to an after-action review, because this is still going for all the post-secondaries in Alberta, and we published that. And the idea was really, here's a whole bunch of things that we learned. Here's 10 things that you can do right now to be able to push your organization forward. And the beauty of it is, if you're working in a big complex organization, all of that applies. It's not just about a teaching and learning environment. If you have multiple business units, if you have multiple stakeholders, if you have those large organizations, or 2 or more buildings, those kinds of things, all of these things apply. And so it's been really cool to see that come out as well.
That's great. I'm going to stick on communications again here because we keep mentioning it and the importance of it, but I also have a question coming in on our Q&As. Before I go there, and I'll go to you, Shawna, with the question, but I just wanted to mention, and Josh, maybe you can just confirm for me if I don't have it right, but when your dashboard came out, or the NATE dashboard on, I forget what it's called, but basically a snapshot of COVID and hospitals in Alberta came out. I thought that was one of the best things I'd seen as well. So maybe just let our viewers know where they can catch that or click on that just to take a look at it as well.
Yeah, I'll get the link out to everybody because it's a little bit of a complicated one. But if you go to nait.ca/CADEM, CADEM, under our resources, you'll be able to find the dashboard. And one of the things that's just happened is we not only have all of the COVID data for every health region, but it's down to the sub-municipal level now. So, different communities you're able to look at. We've also just integrated all of the school closures. We've integrated some stats on what happened in the first, stage 1 of our recovery, stage 2 of our recovery since the beginning. So you can look at the entire timeline and really do some pretty deep dive analytics on it, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, great. It's a great example for any organization or municipality out there that wants to get a really good database and visual for their entity. So Shawna, I've got a question. On the topic of cultural differences in communication, what have you seen in terms of managing crisis communications within an organization that spans many different countries or cultures? Do you adjust your communications based on each culture, or do you remain consistent with your corporate culture of communication?
Well, if you're in an organization that has a global reach, then there's a really opportune, it's a really great opportunity to maybe invest in a working group that spans all those cultural regions. I think it's really important that at the end of the day, I mean, this happened to me at Dow all the time. And I mean, we think that from the US and Canada, our communications would be pretty similar, right? But they're not always. There'd be little inferences or little differences. And at the end of the day, you need to be tailoring your message to the audience you need to reach to take the behaviors or actions you want them to take. And I don't think that one message that spans globally, culturally will do it. But I think there's opportunities to bring together teams that have representatives from each of those geographies that can come together and kind of talk through what that messaging looks like to them and how you can tweak it slightly, because that's the only way you're actually going to make the messaging, be received. You can send it all you want, but if you're not taking into account the ethnic, cultural, and all those elements, language, inferences that happen from geography to geography. And Darren spoke to that already about having to kind of change the mindset there of a CEO to kind of get them on track of where they needed to be with their first fatality. I think that that's the course of action to go. I would be looking at bring people together and talk through it and recognize that you're going to have different communications, likely for different geographies, and keep the context the same, but all the little inferences and little differences that make it matter need to adjust to what your audience is locally.
Great, thanks. And I'll move on to Darren here. There's another question here, and I'll read the question. So I feel my organization has done a good job responding to COVID. But what piece of advice would you give a corporation like mine, which is 12,000 employees or more, all across North America, so a couple different countries, on reaching employees and ensuring that they're not contributing to information fatigue?
Wow, that's a really good question, because of course you have to filter through all the rest of the garbage that's out there, and I'll be very transparent. I mean, we did a small survey just looking at the amount of information that is just coming into this little country of Qatar. 2.5 million people, the size of the same drive between Calgary and Edmonton. That's how big this country is, one of the richest countries in the world. And we started looking at the amount of Arabic information that was coming in, and English-based information, and French, and Pakistani, and Indian, because there's 92 nationalities that live and work in Qatar. And when you look at the one common function, the one common tone of everything that was coming in, every single time we generated something into our organization. Make sure you wash your hands for 20 minutes, for at least 20 seconds. Make sure that social distancing is between 2 meters, like the normal common things that you would expect people to do. Our task force, the task force that we created to deal with COVID, would literally just become inundated with questions about, well, I hear that it's not 2 meters, or I hear that I can be 1.5. I hear that I can, just as long as I do this, I'm not going to catch COVID. If I eat enough garlic, I hear that I'm not going to catch COVID. I hear if I travel to the United States, I'm not going to get COVID. If I go on a particular airline, I'm not going to catch COVID. I mean, it was to a point where the dynamic of information that was coming back into us from every time we tried to push something into the organization, it became a job in itself. And we have a very good public relations team in Qatar, and they were literally overwhelmed at the same time. Being more direct, the message has to be controlled from it has to be, and Shawna really did an excellent job pointing this out. You have to humanize it. And I think, was it Shawna or was it Josh? Well, anyway, we have to humanize. Oh no, sorry, it was Shane. We have to humanize the message, and it's about taking an approach that your employees can identify with, as opposed to getting it from media outlets that have different political agendas other than your safety. I can probably talk about this for 2 hours, but it can be done. It will be done, and certainly it has been done quite successfully. I think probably pushing more towards Shane or the other panels. I'm sure they'd love to weigh in on that question as well.
Yeah, Shane, I was going to go to you next. There are a couple of reasons here. Just if you can expand upon that whole information fatigue. I think we're even hearing it now on the news. But one thing I noticed, because I happened to go just recently from Edmonton, Calgary, Toronto, Sudbury, and yep, I was on a plane, and I took all the precautions I could, and of course everybody else did. The airlines seemed very good as well as, and the airports did, but it seemed to kind of be less of that way when I got out east. And when I look at their numbers, have we done better with information flow or compressing that information fatigue out west? Or what do you think some of the differences might be besides just population base that the West seems to be arguably managing this a bit better than the East?
So I think we need to be, I want to be careful because I certainly don't want to declare victory, halfway through a pandemic, because that just begs for, that just smacks of hubris. I will say, I think there's a couple things. First of all, again, back to the communicator. I think Dr. Dina Hinshaw has done an excellent job, and so she has a great deal of credibility and people are listening to her. I would give a great deal of credit, most of the credit, to the public who have taken this very serious. Again, I think we established a good level of trust very early on, and therefore they have, abided by the public health guidance, and they've done all the right things to keep the numbers relatively low. I think the challenge for Ontario specifically is that they have a number of large centers with their own chief medical officers of health. The message seems to be getting a little muddled between the political and the technical. And so when that happens, I think you get lower levels of adherence to the public health guidance because people aren't really sure. And then you have, and that's when you have the largest scale outbreaks. I would also say that, I am amazed. There is a bit of a cultural difference too, potentially. Specifically, I think we need to take a look at Quebec and what's happened in Quebec, where they seem to have more of a laissez-faire approach to public health measures, and they're seeing a bigger spike. So their numbers are higher, but it doesn't seem to phase them as much politically or socially. So those are the things, that's how I would answer it. I think we did a good job from the outset of gaining the public's trust. And I think we've tried to really stay on message and on point. And in some of those larger jurisdictions, they've had a more of a challenge. I would also point to what BC has done and their Chief Medical Officer of Health, Bonnie Henry, who's done an excellent job in establishing that level of trust. And again, once you do that, then you usually have better adherence to the public health measures and better outcomes.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And Darren, you're right, or Josh, it's going to be years, right, and decades, right, when we all look back on this and how it's all been managed and the different impacts, right, population zones, countries, and how it was managed. So one last thing, and before we go here, and I'll give this to all of you and just go across the panel. Shane, I'll stick with you here then. So what new, and it's interesting because of your different perspectives from the entities that you're with right now. So what opportunities have you seen, all right, whether it's jobs, careers, or technical specialists that are specific to this that have been a result of COVID right now at this time?
Yeah, it's a good question, and to So first of all, I've said for a long time, and I think the data bears me out, that emergency management and business continuity are growth businesses. And this has been a boom for those of you that are professionals in emergency management, business continuity, crisis communications. I think, this symposium underlines the requirement for crisis communications, and Shawna has brought it out. Many organizations, even if they're very large, your emergency management and crisis communications team is 1 or 2 deep, and that's not going to be sufficient for a prolonged emergency or disaster. And so for those of you that are in this business, congratulations. Unfortunately, you're in it at a, fortunately and unfortunately, you're in it at a good time. So I think that's the opportunity, the awareness, the sensitivity around having capable, competent emergency managers and crisis communicators has never, ever, ever been higher.
Wow. Okay, I'll go to Josh and then Darren, and Shawna, I'll let you wrap that up for us because that is definitely your forte. But Josh, go ahead. What have you seen within the post-secondary institutions?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, the biggest takeaway is there's been this long sort of reinforcing of silos. Like, I am a risk manager, I am an emergency manager, I'm a crisis communications, I'm a business continuity person. We need teams that do all of that. And that means that you need more than just one person who can do some of it. And you need an actual team where you've got the ability to have that breadth and that depth of experience and knowledge, and then have an institutional support to be able to say, right, this is our team that deals with crises. Go forth and do good things. Support us. Let us go, and lead us in the right direction. And so, having those teams that have multiple different people or multiple different skill sets with depth, absolutely critical. And so I think, when we start looking at comprehensive emergency management, and I suspect that Bob Jensen's going to talk a little bit about that in the next one, and really understand that, we're dealing with things that are far more complex and complicated than just a one-off incident. This is an economic disaster. This is a health disaster. This is a communications crisis. This is a mental health crisis. And, we're also seeing layered in, if you look across, the United States and around the world, we're seeing some civil unrest. We're seeing natural hazards. We're seeing all the disasters that are coming in at once. So being able to navigate through multiple different things that are happening all at the same time requires breadth and depth.
Great. And Darren, so what have you discovered that you think would have been great to have, or going forward where you really want to fill some void to help you through this now?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think Shane hit the nail on the head. The rush for people to come into the emergency management world and crossing the threshold into the chaos of what, controlling the chaos, which is exactly what emergency management practitioners do. Undoubtedly, we've seen it here on this side of the world as well. Just schools and academia, literally, just year-on-year wait lists now for people trying to get into disaster and emergency management, and it's been it's actually heartwarming to see people like all of us. When we kind of got into this, the discipline was just very much kind of warming up, and now we've really started seeing standardization, and we started seeing a lot more authentic approaches, to the science of disaster and emergency management. The other thing I think is a huge one is technology. It has really ratcheted through the entire planet. Everything from robots that will sanitize. I had an opportunity to go in and look at a plane being sanitized by a robot. It was a surreal experience just watching it happen. But it was something right out of Star Trek, just watching this occur. And I said, wow, I remember us thinking about doing that. And technology, just us having this conversation in this forum with this particular symposium, unheard of, having a conference like this. and people are have not only purchased and bought into this. This is now going to be this is fostering the next change for tomorrow. So I think we've all kind of grabbed hold to a number of things, but I'm going to reserve what Josh said as going to be my number one takeaway. Okay, we as practitioners in disaster and emergency management, your PIO, your BizCon, your logistics, your planning, your operations. Okay, we got the finance guy in the back, way in the back, by the way. I think what's happened now is that we all know it. Every single one of us on this symposium know this. We have now become and have to become an expert of all. We really do have to grab that and elevate our knowledge, because this will pass. Give this another, I'll put myself out there. Give this another year. This will pass, and then what will happen is the world will turn around and say, "Whew, that's done. We don't have to worry about anything again." We still have climate change we have to consider. We still have the next pandemic that will break out. We still have a world that will continually operate in chaos, and our job as practitioners is to make sure that we control it. That we can control that for our clients and control that for our employers. So took a long way around that, Greg. Sorry, but it was a very powerful question, and thanks for asking that.
Thanks very much, Darren. And Shawna, are you able to give us your perspective on from a communications side, what you've seen might be needed?
Absolutely, and I think it's starting right here with my esteemed colleagues, and if I could hug them each individually, I would, for standing up and talking about the importance of communication throughout this COVID crisis. I want to leave kind of with 3 points. The first is I had a chat with a former student last week, and he talked about, we're still working in our silos of excellence. And we want to break down our silos of excellence and bring ourselves together at all that good information and cross share and really start to plan, putting people first, as Amanda Coleman said, and as Shane supported here, putting the human face to it, but also just getting the differing perspectives around the table. We're very good at see the fire, put out the fire, but we need to be thinking about, well, what happens when we have people displaced by that fire, and how could we maybe mitigate it against that fire happening in the first place? And let's start thinking holistically. The second thing I want to say is support your communications team. Don't make assumptions. We all know what that acronym means. Don't make assumptions that your crisis communication team that writes messages for the mayor during their day job is trained to support you with risk and crisis comms in an emergency. They don't get that training at school, right? It doesn't happen as much anymore. So we really, really need to get them the training. You're in charge of the budgets. You can make sure they're involved in your exercises and your planning. Make them understand the critical role they play in all 4 phases of emergency management for communications. And then at the end of the day, communications is the glue. It's integral. We've seen it here. We've seen it every after action review talks about a lack of either interoperational or interoperability communications or just public information communications. Let's get a grip and start bringing communicators in and using them the way they can be used. And anyone who is ever in this field of comms that wants to jump over and work in this space, I've mentored many in the last 6 months looking for ways to move their careers forward or more in this direction. I am available on LinkedIn, and I'm always happy to chat. And thank you for letting me be part of this panel today.
I'm going to take you up on that, Sean.
Yeah, exactly. Man, I could do this for another couple hours. I want to thank you, Ben, Crisis Comms, all the people that have been speaking yesterday, today, all the people that are in viewing from all over the world, and just to the 4 of you and other people out there. But thanks so much. Whether you know it or not, when I have reached out every few months or year or whatever it was and asked you a few questions that might seem a little off or asked for some information, it's all about seriously sharing this, and it's helped me, and being able to know you and work with you, it's been a pleasure, and I'm really glad I was able to do this today. Humbled by the request, and I'm glad to be a part of it. So thanks very much. And coming up, I think Bob Jensen, who's another friend I've had in emergency management, and he'll be great. I know it. And keep calm and carry on. So Ben, I think you're still there. Thanks for everything, everybody. This was awesome.
Yeah, and again,
Thanks, guys.
to echo you, Greg, thank you, Darren, Josh, Shawna, Shane. You're all so inspiring, and you know, our paths continue to cross, and we share so many of the same passions. It's just great to have you join us and share that today. Thank you so much. And Greg, dearest of all friends, thanks for running that today. And we all kind of work together, as I've kind of mentioned before. You know, there's opportunities. You don't have to do this stuff alone, and there's resources and people and companies that are there. And if you're in an organization thinking, how can we do this? You don't have to do it alone. There's help. There's people that are passionate about helping, and many of them are here now and coming up, and yesterday, and more coming this afternoon. So thank you so much, you guys. It's 10 o'clock. Bob, are you okay if we just take like a 5 minute before we go, just in case anybody needs to grab a coffee refill?
Absolutely. I should run down and get a coffee myself.
Yeah, you run and grab a coffee, boss. And to everybody watching, we don't really like doing the plug, but if you like what you're hearing today, if you like what you've heard yesterday, if things are resonating for you, we sure would appreciate a shout out. There's a hashtag there I've been using, Virtually Crisis Conference.